much. First of all, let me say to those of you gathered here, good afternoon, but I'll say to our guest speaker, good very early morning. I'm thinking that we're at about 5:30 Australian time, and she's nodding yes, knowingly, tiringly, but we're really excited to have Beverley, and I'm going to ask my colleague in a moment to do a more formal introduction. So my name's Larry Reagan. I'm in two co-director roles at the moment. I'm co-director of the Center for Online Innovation and Learning here at Penn State. I'm also co-director of the Institute for Emerging Leadership in Online Learning, IELOL. And we have a room full of IELOL guests. Can you just put your hands up? So that's our crew. They represent, I think, 5 or 6 countries. I can't tell you the number of schools. So we have 42 guests this year, and we're in our second day of a 4-day institute. So it's so nice to have them here. And then our Penn State affiliates, our colleagues around, a handful. Okay, good. And hopefully we'll have other individuals join us as well. So this is our 4th COIL Fischer speaker. Beverley Oliver from Deakin University is going to share some thoughts with us in a moment. As you know, the COIL Fischer Speaker Series is where we identify individuals around the world who are leading thought leaders in terms of innovation, technology, pedagogy, higher education. And we like to bring them to the Penn State and extended community. And we dovetailed this talk today with our institute, which turned out to be a nice combination. So with that, I'd like to introduce my co-leader, Bruce Chalou. Bruce is the executive director of the Sloan C organization. Many of you know that name who've been around Penn State because Sloan funded a lot of the startup of the World Campus back in the mid-90s. Many of you have been around on that project for a while. The Sloan C organization developed as a group of colleges and universities who were initially sponsored by the Sloan Foundation, and it is now a standalone, I think, the premier online learning organization within the United States focused on pedagogy and online learning. And so it's my pleasure to have Bruce here with us today as one of our co-leaders, and he's going to introduce Beverley. So welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Larry, very much. We agree with that last statement about our organization, so thank you. I mean, if I can't agree with that, what can I agree with? Good morning, Beverley. Let me take just a minute or two, and then we'll turn it over to you. Last November at the Ascalite Conference in Wellington, New Zealand, a few hours after a marvelous party following the world premiere of The Hobbit, which was in Wellington that day before, I wandered. That's wandered with an A, not with an O. Wandered, like many, and probably most others, into a lecture hall to hear the closing keynote of the conference. Little did we know what awaited us. It was, in a few words, one of the finest and most thought-provoking presentations I had heard in years. It generated literally an electric buzz, and I know Liz was there, and I think we discussed this yesterday, and she will confirm that. The presenter was Professor Beverley Oliver. I told Larry about the experience and suggested, indeed encouraged, maybe even directed as a co-director, him to go get Beverley for IELOL 2013. She couldn't join us in person, but will today via technology. Apparently the technology gods are working for us right now. So it is my sincere pleasure to introduce Beverley to you. She is, as Larry noted, the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Education at Deakin University, Victoria, Melbourne, multiple campuses. I think the Melbourne campus is the largest, Beverley. And is an Australian Learning and Teaching Council National Teaching Fellow. Her leadership has been recognized with 2 ALTC citations for outstanding contributions to student learning in 2008, 2010, and she publishes in a range of publications on teaching and learning, and is doing some editorship for a publication as well. If I can get this to toggle down, just one moment. Just a little bit to give you some context about Deakin University. So I did a little research of my own. It was established in 1974. It was Victoria's 4th university and the first in the region first in regional Victoria. Deakin started life as a small regional university, but has now become one of Australia's major universities, operates in a global connected world with the digital economy influencing every aspect of Deakin's activities. It is Australia's 9th largest university, has a staff of more than 3,300, and serves over 42,000 students, about a fifth who are international students from over 100 countries. 29% of Deakin students study off campus, while 35% of their students study part-time in their off-campus programs, on and off-campus programs. Just one last note, and then I'm going to get off the stage, such as it is, and turn to Beverley. I was looking at their website, and they have something called the Deakin Promise in learning, which is, quote, to offer brilliant education where you are and where you want to go, unquote. Capitalizing on new technologies, Deakin aims to deliver responsive programs wherever students are geographically located, at home, on campus, in the community, at the workplace, in Australia, or elsewhere, wherever students are in their learning preparedness and wherever students are in their career trajectory and life stages. I think that says quite a bit about where their institution is and where it's going. And with that all too long introduction, but a little bit of context, it's indeed my pleasure to introduce Beverley Oliver. Beverley.
Thank you very much, Larry and Bruce. That was a pretty stunning introduction. I hope you can hear me okay. I can't see you, but I'm trusting that you can see me, and I've got some slides up on the screen, so I'll presume we can sally forth, if that's okay. So thank you very much, and thank you so much for the invitation to share some thoughts. I'm not sure if I can make it electric from around this side of the world and at this time of the morning for me, but I'll do my best. And I guess one of the things that's fantastic about this is what we're trying to offer students, to make it almost as real from across distance and time through the screen as you could be actually in the room. It's never as good. I wish I was there with you. However, as Larry said, I just couldn't make it on this occasion. Perhaps another time. So, my topic this morning is on the front of change. I thought I would just add a little bit to that and say on the frontier of change, because that's how it feels sometimes. And you have exactly captured it, Bruce, when you've done your homework and looked at what we're trying to do at Deakin. And we also have another byline somewhere that says we want to be at the digital frontier, which sounds great and feels great sometimes. Some colleagues have reminded me, though, that being at the frontier, being a pioneer, means you have arrows in your back and your face is in the mud. It's not all glamorous. So it can be pretty tough going sometimes. Because I guess that leads me to the topic of being a change leader in teaching and learning in higher education, which is what we do, and why you're actually in this room today. So I take that as my context, and I thought I would start by actually just reminding you of where I am in the world and where you are. And I know you're not exactly where that pink dot is, but sort of in that region. And in fact, if you took a knitting needle and put it through the globe, it would come out where I normally live, which is in Perth. And I know I have a few colleagues in the room from Australia, so that won't be so unfamiliar. But this morning I'm coming to you from Melbourne in Australia, which is down the other corner of Australia. And as has been pointed out, I'm from Deakin University. We have around 45,000 students that we work with. And just to show you a little more context, those 45,000 students, I should say, are actually scattered not just in Melbourne, but all around the country. And I'm just showing you a picture there of the capital cities of Australia, where we have students who are studying by distance. We used to say distance education. We now call that digital education. That's one of our challenges. It's almost a bigger challenge, having been a distance educator, now working in digital education. I'll talk more about that as we go. That's part of the Change Leadership Challenge. So back to the context, again, just to set the scene, a little bit more about higher education in Australia. I'm talking about tertiary education really. We have about 1.1 million students in the sector. So, of course, we have a population in Australia around 22, 23 million people. And we have in vocational education, which is more, I don't know the equivalent, I'm sorry, in the US, but it's, people getting more trades and so on, about 1.7 million people. But this morning I'm going to really focus more on higher education, quite frankly, and just to give you the idea that there are about 39 universities in my country. We're all quite large by US standards. They're self-accrediting. We have a couple of privates. Some of our challenges include these, and they might resonate with your university. Research is a big focus. Our leaders in our universities have become very focused on world rankings for research. Well, world rankings are based on research because you can count research. It's not so easy to count teaching and learning, certainly in my country. In higher education Australia, we have undergraduate and postgraduate, but some of the difference is that many of our undergraduate programs, like medicine, dentistry, law and so on, are largely professionally oriented. So as a young person in Australia, you can go to university at 18 years of age, sign up and begin to study to become a pharmacist, for example, or a nurse or a teacher and so on. We don't have quite the same system. We have a highly casualised ageing academic workforce. Not me, of course, but other people. So that's a challenge. We have industrial challenges. And we have a mix of undergrad and postgrad students that look a little bit like this. The yellow is international students. The blue is domestic students. That's also made a great deal of change in our sector. The international students, quite frankly, are bringing the sector, but that's been challenged lately, where those international students have been dropping a little bit. So that just shows you that. And just very quickly, this is the sort of thing that people study in undergraduate education. So you can see there that we have a very high intake in management and commerce, with international a large part of that. And other high areas are society and culture, creative arts to some extent. Health is very big, of course, nursing, medicine, allied health services, the sciences, and so on. So there's just a little quick tour of what we mean by higher education in Australia. And so these are some of the things that are the policy environment that we work in. We have big funding drivers. Our government is very keen on protecting brand Australia. That tells you something about their thinking, about higher education as a commodity. The international student intake has had a downturn in the last few years. This has made it pretty tough for us. We are in a what can only be described as a fairly capricious political situation. We have a federal election coming up, and I can almost see my Australian colleagues nodding in the room. And we're in a fairly challenging situation. I think participation agenda in higher education in Australia, where we've been in what we call an uncapped environment, where we are striving. The policy is to take more people into universities and to have 40% of the Australian population actually have a bachelor degree within the next 5 to 10, 15 years. So this is a little different, and so we have many challenges. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Certainly protecting brand Australia does try to drive things rather. But in that policy environment and in that part of the world, I'm thinking perhaps that it doesn't sound terribly different from where you are. Certainly we're very tuned in to what happens in the US and other parts of the world, and I realise we have colleagues in the room from Europe as well and the UK. I think we're all in the midst of change. Some would say highly disruptive change. But I guess the things I'd like to focus on this morning are the leadership that we need to exhibit, I think, and the challenge is really curriculum reform in the online world. So if we think about why students enrol, what they learn, how they learn, and how we know whether they learn, To me, these are the core values and the things that really count. If we try to stay true to these things and the things that we signed up for to work in higher education, these are the things I think that really do make quite a bit of difference. So I'm going to focus a little bit on these. I've already mentioned that we're in a sector under stress. I know in the US it would be the rising costs of education, plus the MOOCs. I have to say MOOC because it's terribly fashionable these days. Every conference that gets organised and advertised in my country certainly has MOOC in it somewhere. I'll talk a little about that. I'd like to talk about what we're trying to do ourselves in that area, but we're also very focused on these things. We have high expectations from our community and employers. As you see, different business models. I think that's driving across the world. We have Coursera. We all have Coursera. We're watching that very carefully, edX and others, the unbundling of higher education. How do you charge for the higher education experience when now a lot of it is free? Which bit do you charge for? Credit, credentialing, and what's it worth? If you can do it in a different business model, and we're doing that at Deakin, what are students then prepared to pay for? So where is the competition from private and international and so on? FutureLearn in the United Kingdom is, I guess, the sort of the UK equivalent to a Coursera. So what does a university like mine, and I'll be quite frank about that, you know, a very good but mid-level university among 39 in a small isolated country, when higher education becomes highly corporatised, globalised and disrupted, what does that mean for me and my colleagues in this part of the world? So, I'll go now to what Bruce talked about. This is our Live the Future Agenda 2020 strategic plan. And there exactly is our byline, and I really like it. Interestingly, colleagues within the university ask us, the senior leadership, well, which marketing company did you get in to buy that line for us? Well, actually, we made it up ourselves, which really cheers me up, because this is what I think it's all about. It's about brilliant education, where you are and where you want to go, and these are the core values. These are the things that I like to say get us out of bed in the morning. Well, actually this morning very early, but it's actually about a really solid education for people, graduates who want a career, but also want to take their place in a rapidly changing world and make a contribution to that world. So for me, it boils down to these two things. These are the pillars driving what we want to do in teaching and learning. And I'm going to talk about these in some detail, because it's the underpinning pedagogy that really makes the difference, I think. I was saying to Larry before you came back, I think we need two revolutions going on at once. One is around the digital disruption. Yes, that's an amazing opportunity, and what an interesting time we live in. But also it's around what kind of teaching and learning, and how do we credential that? What counts in this kind of education? So evidence for graduate employability is really important to me. It's not just about jobs, and we're not just job factories. It's making people ready, helping them to know that they're ready to take their place in the workaday world, because people do have to eat and have a job before they can change the world. And it's also making that as personal, engaging and relevant as you possibly can, using whatever tools are at your fingertips. And when I went to school last century, the tools were different, and some people really engaged me and some people really didn't. But it really does come down to people and teachers and students, I think, no matter what the technologies. I was talking to someone in Australia recently, and they said there's a very easy answer to this question. Why do students go to university? Why do they engage in college? Why do they enroll? And their answer was, and I hope you enjoy this, you can sum it up in 3 M's. And what would those 3 M's be? And if I were in the room where I could really see and engage with you, I would encourage you to actually have a guess at what they are. Well, their answer was this: mind, money, and marriage. Why do people go to college? Well, they want to improve their mind, they want an education, they want to make money eventually, that would be career, And of course, it's a great dating service. We are still a great dating agency, let's face it. Certainly for undergraduates and what we would call in Australia school leavers, of course. And so how do you replicate that, all of it, and build the social networks as well? I guess that's what I'm really... Or someone quipped in Australia, the M is also mateship, which is a great word in Australia where we think we're all mates and we build friendship, of course. So it is that too. And that's, of course, what we remember. And that, for many of us, is very much an on-campus experience. And so those of us who are middle-aged sort of hope that that doesn't disappear. I'm not so sure. I think things have changed. So what I'm showing you now is the underpinning pedagogical model that I think was around when I went to university last century. And so there you have a campus. Late in the century, we discovered the World Wide Web, but this was the teaching model, and I'm using an acronym up the top. I think this is a model past its use by date. I hope that makes some sense to you, because we have it stamped on our groceries in Australia when something's past its use by date. So this is what was done for me as a teacher, as a student, and what I did myself for many years as a teacher. And I'm going to sum it up in these 4 things: expectations, experiences, evidence, and enhancement. So I would think about, as a young teacher, what's the content? What's the syllabus? How will I teach that? And specifically, how many lectures will I give? How will I test it? How many essays will I set? How many tests will I set? And how will I mark that and allocate those 100 magic marks and grades? And if I want to enhance the experience, I would do it in my unit. Now, when we say units, I mean a subject or a module, one semester-long event in a person's career. So I didn't enhance it as part of a course program degree team. I tended to work in isolation. Many of us still work this way. Many people in my own university work this way. This is the culture. What's the content? How many times will I stand up and say that content in a semester? How will I test, mark and grade? And how will I maybe make it better if I feel like doing that? So we need a new model, and we need a new way of doing things. And I hope you saw that flip around, because I think now the cloud is very big. And I'm going to talk about the cloud, meaning the new word for online. I don't mean cloud computing. At Deakin, we've adopted the term cloud learning, and it's a bit naff, I suppose you'd say. And some of my colleagues think it's a bit naff. What do you mean by cloud learning? Well, we've decided not to use the term online learning, because that in itself keeps us cemented into what we were doing 3 or 5 years ago, which is not what we need to do now. Online learning has been very print-based, in a sense. Digitise the print, upload, download, use the great electronic post office in the sky, in a learning management system. That's our challenge. We need to move on from that. But I've swapped around the evidence and experience because I'd like to share with you what I think we're trying to drive at the same time in the digital space. So if I put it this way, we need to focus on what it is exactly that students need to learn. Is it all that content, or is it something else as well? How do we know whether they've actually learnt that? And do marks, grades and credits actually cut it anymore? Is that enough? How do they learn those things? What are the experiences that help them to learn? And it's not exactly the same, I think, as sitting in lectures. And how can we enable student success? And what's our role as leaders in that? So I'm going to keep moving on. If I put the headlines around that, I would focus on making the outcomes and standards really clear. Making sure they know how to master those outcomes and have the evidence themselves that they know those outcomes. Make it a really personal, connected learning experience. And if I go back to the marriage and mateship idea, I think that's our challenge in the digital sphere. It could become, or we may suspect it, we worry that it could be a very disconnected experience. But I'm using cloud learning now to talk to you. I think this is what the challenge is to actually connect human beings through the screen, almost as if I were in the room with you. And I really wish I could see you and see the whites of your eyes, and I hope you can see mine, because I think that's what it's really all about. It's about connecting with human beings. How do we do that in the screen? That's the challenge. Not so much in discussion forums where you actually just read and type things. That makes it hard. How do you systematically enhance whole degree courses to make sure all of those first three things work? So moving on, in my country, we tend to count these things. We count the success of my university on the marks, grades and credits that students add up, the time they spend on the seat, pass rates, completion rates. We have national data sets that get reported where our graduates, just finished, tell us in numbers whether they thought the teaching was good, whether they got generic skills and so on. Now, as in every country, governments love numbers because numbers are easy to count. The trouble with that is what you can count ends up counting. And I would contest in education, as in measuring quality of education, you can't always drill it down to numbers. It has to be something different. So I guess we're asking in this digital age, what else could we count? I'm sorry, there's a word gone off the screen there. Well, I think one of the technologies that is emerging is going to help us count progress towards becoming an employable, engaged citizen. That really counts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. In Australia, we have the Australian Qualifications Framework, where we've now said more clearly what it means to get a bachelor degree or a master's degree. In the US, I know you have the Lumina degree profile, and other countries are starting to do this as well. Certainly the UK has been doing this for a very long time. So the laws, if you like, and the agreed expectations are much clearer. In the Australian Qualifications Framework, it now puts in law that we have to show as a university that our students are not just getting knowledge outcomes. Yes, we absolutely need that. But we have to show that our students also have the fundamental skills, people skills. You can read them there. And they're like the American Association of Colleges and Universities Essential Learning Outcomes, or the generic learning skills that are becoming much more prevalent across every sector, across all jurisdictions. If I say the Hello outcomes, the PISA outcomes across the world, we're focusing more on these things as well as knowledge. And this has been a large area that we've focused on in Australia. My Australian colleagues will know that we've often called these graduate attributes, for example. So at my university, this is what they look like. So we have 8 very clear learning outcomes. You know, the group, I think, who led the world in this was a small American university or college in Milwaukee, and that I'm sure will be very familiar to you, who had a very outcomes-focused education or outcomes-based. And lots of us have learnt from that. I know we started talking about that 10 years ago, but now actually every degree in my university is being enhanced to make sure we know exactly where are students assessed in these things. It's no good just to say marketing anymore, our graduates can do these things. Well, show me where. So to cut to the chase, the challenge though is that this is where we all stumble. We may agree or disagree over what those high-level learning outcomes are, contextualised to the discipline, to pharmacy, medicine, dentistry, whatever it is. But we all stumble, and I would contend even in the MOOCs, we stumble on this big question that's on the screen. How do we test and measure these things? You can see I've put measure there for a reason. How do I add up the numbers? So what we're doing at Deakin is trying to flip this question. Flipping is very popular these days, so I'm going to flip that question to this one. How do we know whether students learn? So instead of saying how can we test and measure, actually how can the students evidence these things? Let's put it back on the students, because as employable graduates they need to know where is the evidence they really can do those things, and that's where we come on to mastering outcomes. So if we go to more than just that, if we draw on evidence from their formal assessments in their degree plus their life experiences, then that would dictate the sort of assessment that we would focus on in a degree program. We at Deakin think it's more important to focus a little more on self-assessment peer assessment and industry assessment, not just teacher assessment all the time. And this would guide us in what kind of technologies we would pick up and try and innovate with. Portfolios or e-portfolios are not a new idea. Digital badging is a new idea. I'd like to show you what we're doing in that. Trying simulations and games as well. I won't talk about those much today, but I guess the point is the pedagogy should frame the sort of technologies that we want to try. Otherwise, we will fall into the trap of trying every technology that comes along for the sake of it, and that, as we know, is not always a great success. So, at Deakin, we want to use digital badging with portfolios of rich digital evidence that students really can do those things. I know that digital badging is not new to you, but in case it is, I just put this slide up, openbadges.org. I really think this is a very clever unbundling that's going to lead also to good learning. So if we go back to the Deakin idea, if every student had this digital dashboard, for example, and this is a very rough sort of prototype of what it could look like, wouldn't it be interesting if we could organise a learning management system, now there's a challenge, to emulate this kind of thing where a student could say, in my degree, those are the things that really matter. I can see that I have my badges there in front of me. You can see I've used the icons in a little badge thing. And in fact, those little badges link to artefacts in a range of media. And the badges were given by a range of people. Peers, for example, have said, well, I'm giving you a badge because I've actually seen evidence that you really can communicate well, work in a team, you are a globally aware citizen or an industry mentor and so on. So this is the challenge we set ourselves. How could we do this in a manageable way? I guess many people, and I've connected with many people in the US who've been working in the e-portfolio space for many years. The challenge with the e-portfolio thing is that we worry that we need to go in there and assess every piece of evidence that every student has ever given us. I don't think that is the challenge. I think the challenge is for the student to curate the best piece of evidence that they've got, or the best 2 or 3, or the journey that they've made from low-level learning to higher-level learning. And I guess this is the thing too for me, if it really is about helping people get to where they want to go, the link between what we assess and how we gather the evidence and their resume or curriculum vitae should be much closer, because that's the digital evidence they carry forward with them, and I think that's the real challenge, and so on. I think the challenge is those two things are not as clearly linked. But moving on back to the model, and just to close that circle a little, I'll come back to these things. Being personally connected is not about putting things in the cloud or putting it online. As I try to say to colleagues, you can be just as boring in the cloud as you can in the classroom. Lecturing is lecturing, and if you film the lecture and you're just a talking head, it's still not real engaging. You have to engage with people. So, you see, we set ourselves the challenge. We should do more face-to-face dialogue. I'm trying to do that with you now. Bit of a monologue, but we'll get to the dialogue shortly. Tutoring, mentoring, coaching, role play. These are the things we need to do on the screen and in the classroom. And we should set up these things and try these things out to maybe make it work. The key is not that it's in the cloud, but it's personal, engaging and relevant. It's all about me, really, helping me to learn and so on. So I guess the challenge for us is to think about how did we learn best? What was our best learning? What was our best experience? If I were in the room, and I kind of am, I'd like you to think about what your best learning experience was ever. Put your hand up if it was a website or a textbook. I hope there are no hands up. Great, that's a relief. Or a great discussion forum. Probably not. If I say put your hand up if you were thinking of a person, I'm hoping hands go up. It was a teacher who inspired you, who enthused you, who believed in you, who knew your name and said, you know what, I know you want to be a whatever it is, an online leader in higher education. This is how you do it. this is what it takes. Let me show you how, let me walk on that path with you in whatever the field was that you were studying. That's our challenge. And I guess it's what I would mean by sticking to core values. A lot of that for us has happened face to face. And I think the challenge is to make that face to face in the cloud. Anyway, I'll move on. So you heard at the beginning, we have many off-campus students at our university. That term doesn't work anymore because being on campus doesn't work anymore either. 3/4 of our students are on campus. Well, my colleagues who teach them wish they would come onto campus occasionally because they don't. In fact, sometimes they're on campus, but they're actually sitting in the library watching the captured lecture that was delivered over in the next building because it was warmer in the library and they were sitting with their friends. So because we are digitising much of the learning experience, they're actually experiencing it as it works for them. So that's one of our challenges. So when the cloud is very big, this may be the teacher. This actually is one of the best teachers in Australia. This is a colleague from another university, not mine yet, unfortunately. And he's a proven great educator. I just think in the digital age, many students will actually experience him like this. And they will be less worried about that than you and I are. And as I said before, we're doing this ourselves today. We connect with our families like this all the time. I know it's not as easy to get that working in a large teaching environment, and the technology does fail us. Someone commented earlier as we were getting ready, the technology gods are with us. Yes, I think those technology gods will become more benevolent as this becomes more, and those devices become cheaper and more powerful, and many more of our students have them. They are becoming the new minimum standard. We're not all there yet, and certainly in Australia we have very large regional areas which are not connected, but we'll work with that. But I guess what I wanted to share with you too, and I'm showing you the top of my iPad, my home screen on my iPad. We have very high expectations in this field. I'm showing you my digital habitat. I'm a middle-aged Australian woman. Gee, I hate saying that, but you know, there's the truth. Here is my world. I've become extremely used to this. So I sit there with my iPad. You can see what I do. I go to the bank like this now. In fact, the last time I walked into the bank was a very long time ago, and if I do, they actually charge me to talk to me at the counter. I listen to the radio, and this comes from New York, and it's a very cool app. But I listen to it on this device, not that one called the radio anymore. Here's me being beaten in words with friends, one of my mates on the other side of Australia. Here's me watching TV because I watch it on the iPad now. And by the way, that was a really good series. Here's me reading a paper. This is the trade paper in higher education in Australia. And of course, I read it on an app now. And, you know, if I click that button on the top right-hand corner, it'll translate it into 5 languages for me in front of my very own eyes. And I can even see all the ads and everything now. Here's me playing a game. And if I were not a middle-aged woman, that game would be much more interesting, I'm sure. Here's one that I found last week. Instead of lining up and sitting in a waiting room to see a local doctor or a general practitioner, I can now actually speak to an Australian doctor online using Skype at this website called GP2U. In fact, isn't this interesting? I was in Sydney last week, and here were the doctors available to speak to me at 12:16 noon on that Thursday. All of these people were sitting available for a Skype appointment. Notice there were 397. But you know, I could just ring them up and talk to them on Skype, and I could get health insurance for that if they were more than 15 kilometres from where I was. And, you know, my colleagues in Australia would be thinking, I'll bet those people are actually in India. And that sounds racist, and I'm sorry, it's not. It's just that a lot of the help centres, well, actually, these people are not. They're local people. So I often use this slide to say to my colleagues, so don't think anything special is happening in higher education. I know my colleagues want students to come and sit at their feet in a lecture? They're not coming. They're going to watch online. Here is Visify. I gave it my credentials in LinkedIn and Twitter a minute ago, and it actually just shows me myself and where I live and where I've worked and what I talk about online in this highly visual way. Guess I'm going back to my thesis. This is the digital world I live in as a middle-aged person. The students we have in front of us have really high expectations of the digital world. And then they come to uni. Uh-oh. And then they log on to our learning management system. Ours is desire to learn. You have this one, or you probably have Blackboard or Moodle or whatever it is that you're using. And folks, Houston, we have a little challenge here. If you think about all the digital things I've been showing you where it's easy to use, it's easy to see, you touch it, it works. Well, this is what students in my university at the digital frontier are seeing. And I'm not criticising desire to learn. Well, I sort of am a little. I'm challenging them to say, guys, we've got to do better than this. So all of us have bought into very large, expensive, complex, off-the-shelf, text-heavy, book-like. I've put a big circle around table of contents for a reason. You know, this is upload, download, digital post office in the sky. This is the challenge, is to actually use the systems we have to make it real easy to engage in a really nice, slick learning environment. So, let me go back to MOOCs. I think they've given us all attention. They've given us all some credibility. You know, the president of a university in Australia is called a vice-chancellor, and I often joke that in the last 3 years, presidents and vice-chancellors have discovered this amazing thing called online learning. And you can do a MOOC now, you know, and people are doing that all over the world. Yes, we are, and we've been doing it for many, many years. Penn State and all our great colleagues have been working in this field for years. But I think the MOOCs are giving us permission to try new things. But I would suggest to you that some of the MOOCs actually stand for something a little different. Massive, open, old model courses. If I go back to that original slide, it's a lot about talking and testing. So the challenge for us is actually to move forward. So I'm going to talk about now and show you a little innovation we're trying. We might get this wrong, but we've kind of given ourselves a challenge to, well, go on then. Go and make a MOOC and show colleagues at Deakin how could this look in the cloud, and how could we actually focus on the learning that we're trying to focus on. So I'm going to share with you our MOOC. It's called Deakin Connect. It's not Coursera. We've built it ourselves. It's one small course or unit or module. We've done it because we wanted to give ourselves a challenge to see, can you show me that world in a new learning management system? So this is the screenshot from the top of the screen. We've tried to make it really simple and slick, and it's got 6 buttons, a bit like an iPad, except we've gone for more than one button. It's 6. And I'm going to show you some screenshots because we think the learning proposition is you need to learn, engage, network, evidence, and credit. That's actually the learning journey. And we've given ourselves a challenge of looking at personal connection, mastering outcomes. So in there, and I'm just going to skip through some screenshots, here we have the course leader, the professor, Dr. Phil. Our topic in here is humanitarian responses to 21st century disasters. We've picked that topic. We think it's worldly. It's a contribution to what's important. It's something we teach and we're good at. But we've tried to keep the screen really slick. And in the learning thing now, it's not a table of contents. It's curated resources. There's a 5-minute video where Dr. Phil gives you a little roundup of what we're going to talk about today, this week, and down the screen would be TED Talks and other resources that are curated for the learner. There's a sim in there that we'll be releasing this week because you can actually do these things on screen. That's not new, but I'm just showing you we've put one in there. Engage. Here's a discussion board with pictures. Over on the right-hand side, the learner can agree, challenge, ask. Discussion boards are still a real challenge. We actually have 1,300 people in here from 16 countries. So 1,300 people is not 60,000. It's not that massive, but it is pretty massive for us. We think that's really interesting. It's really engaging, and people are in there sharing stuff from all around the world. But here's the thing, in network, one of the challenges in Desire to Learn in my university is we can only engage with people from Deakin. In the MOOC, we've got 1,300 people networking like this, and you can see they've got Facebook and LinkedIn credentials. We're asking them to use a Pathbright portfolio. That's the little orange icon you can see there, and you can see when they've made a comment. And they've got digital badging working, which is where I'm going with this. So that's the little black dots on Peter Smith's little card there. And this is the big difference that I hope we're trying to do. So we've set ourselves this task. Instead of saying, do a quiz in here and add up your marks and see if you know the stuff, you can do a little self-check. You can do a little quiz if you want to, but it's only if you want to. What we've said to people is, guys, here are the outcomes and standards. Make a portfolio in Pathbright. It's free. We suggest you demonstrate your learning in a review, an analysis, whatever it is. Use any media you like. Here are the outcomes and here are the standards we think you should try and achieve. Put it in your portfolio. When you do, you can see the learning outcomes there on the left in this icon. When you submit some evidence, tick a box, a green tick will appear, to say you've applied for a peer to go and look at your work and warrant or credential you to say, yes, I think they've met the standards. Now, this is a MOOC, there's 1,300 people, so we're not going to do teacher accreditation because we wouldn't be able to deliver that. But we are offering digital badges for peer credit. We've had to think really hard about this. You see, it has no Deakin logo on it. It's Deakin Connect because we can't have peers giving each other Deakin credit. Deakin credit is what my university sells. That's our business. So we can't give it away for free. So what we've said to people is, give this peer crediting a go, try the digital badging, and we're going to see what happens. If it works, we want to knit this into our learning management system, teacher and mentor and peer credit. So we want to use the MOOC to iron out the bugs. It's free, so it's an experiment. We've been really upfront with that. See how it goes. And can we warrant the things that count on the side of the screen, not just the marks, grades and credits, which we still use, but those things. We've picked 5 learning outcomes there. So just wrapping up now, here's the business model. So that MOOC in Deakin Connect is one subject. We will do a couple of others. It's free for everyone. Anyone can go in there and do all of that for free. Then, if they want, they can cross a line, enter a different relationship with Deakin University. They can apply to have their learning formally assessed. They can bring 2 learning exhibits. That's what we're calling them, a learning exhibit. Notice it's not an assessment, it's an exhibition of your learning. You want to go to the evidence thing. We're asking them to bring 2 of their exhibits with them. We'll give them a research paper and an interview. That will be on Skype, by the way. And if they pay their money, this is about 1/4 of the cost of doing the unit normally. When they sign up and to do the whole degree, we will credit them with the equivalent of the first unit of the degree. So if you like, it's like a loss leader. And for 25% of the cost, they do their first unit as a MOOC plus assessment, and they're actually in their degree. We actually don't give them a certificate or anything to take away with them. They have peer badges. They can display those on LinkedIn and Facebook, but they're peer badges. So what do they mean? Well, it's like LinkedIn. People give you endorsements. What does it mean? Well, it's nice, but it doesn't really mean a lot in the sense of it's not a degree. It's just people saying you're good at stuff. That's good. So that's Deakin Connect. It's open now. We say to people it may be massive, it may be small, it may be tiny. We're not sure. We've got people in there, and actually that's pretty good because the system's not falling apart. It's good. We're working with a small learning management system company to do that, Janison. Well, they're sort of small, but they're very good. But we're doing it for our own purposes. We want to test our assessment model. We're testing a prototype. We're not going to make this our new learning management system, but we want to use our own learning management system to see if we can emulate this sort of cleaner, neater look and to test the business model. It's open now. That's the address. Most welcome to go in there and join it. We'd love your feedback. We seriously are looking for feedback from around the world, colleagues, our own colleagues at Deakin. Tell us the bits that work, tell us the bits that don't, because we want to change the conversation. We think we need to do a whole lot better online rather than upload, download, talk and test, and really see if we can deliver this model. If we can't, I think we can. If we can't, we need to rethink the model, because this is what counts, I believe, and I'm wrapping up now. I think our job now in higher education has changed. It's not to talk and test. That's what I was doing last century. I think our job as leaders is to set the standards for students, mentor them to achieve those standards, to accredit the standards, and to actually use evidence for a whole course to really guide the enhancement of the learning experience. And that's the last bit. I'm not going to spend much more time on that. We've got a program of enhancing every degree. Bruce heard me talk about that at Ascalite. We call it the sandpits. Sandpit meaning we put a whole degree program and work with the whole course to redesign the whole course for the very things I've talked about. If you'd like to have a look at that, it's online. You can have a look at all the documentation. I'll just wrap up now and talk about what we do. Our job as leaders in teaching and learning, you and me, is to engineer change and to lead change. Here's a few thoughts, and it's just a big pile of words. I'm going to leave you with that slide that you might like to talk about, but I'll just pull out some highlights. I think our job is to stick to the core values and design the pedagogical model in words that people can understand. I tend to use that circle with 4 dots on it, without being condescending, I hope, to clearly explain what it is that we're trying to do here. We work with a large teaching workforce who are very focused on their discipline. If that's pharmacy or nursing, our colleagues are extremely skilled in these areas, not always so skilled in pedagogy and teaching and learning. In fact, they're not that interested sometimes. Well, that's who we work with. So we've got to make the message really clear. Our job is to build teams, to seek peer endorsement, to lead change, and to hitch our wagon to the bandwagon, to take our colleagues and to go with them over the top, if you like, into the new world. There's a whole pile of things there. I'm not going to go into them. I'm going to finish up now. And because I'd love to, it'd be great if I could see you, but I'm going to turn the slides off if that's okay. And so we can actually have more of a face-to-face conversation and engagement. I hope that's been really useful, interesting and challenging. I've certainly woken up a bit more than I was at the beginning of the day.
Beverley, thank you. You'd never know that it was 5:30 in the morning there in Australia, and you've woken us up. Thank you so much, Beverley, for just a stimulating and very thoughtful combination, aggregation of lots of ideas, I think, that are bouncing around in higher education. A lot of sometimes what can be just empty buzzwords, and you found a very nice way to tie those together into something, into a really new, meaningful learning environment. So let me turn it over to our audience and see what kinds of questions we might have from the group. And we're going to need to move the mic around, so if you'll just put your hand up. And then I think Beverly's going to be able to hear you.
How have you been able to accomplish all of these things within your university? My guess is you didn't dictate everything. So what process did you use to go through to get buy-in?
Oh, you think we've done it all? That's terrific.
Just who you are and where you're from.
I'm Gail Rhodes. I'm from the University of Louisville.
Yeah. Look, seriously, we haven't. We have big challenges, but I tell you what, we've agreed to do it. That doesn't mean every single teaching staff member in my university thinks this is a fabulous idea. We have people who are cynical about this cloud thing. What is this? Why should I do it? To be quite honest, in our sector we have I mentioned an aging demographic. Some colleagues are 5 or 10 years out from retirement. This is another fad. It'll go away. I don't think it will. But, we haven't done it, but we're on our way. We're on our way, and part of it, quite seriously, is making that little MOOC, the strategy behind that, rather than just talk about it and then leave people to make their way through that learning management system, which is hard to use and difficult and, it doesn't work sometimes. Build a little prototype. Build an example. Show them the future. Ask them to engage. It's a hands-on place you can go and play. We want all our teaching stuff to go in there. They're not there yet. So I guess it's coaxing, cajoling, doing the hard yards, getting up at 5:30 in the morning. Seriously. How do I do it at Deakin?
Introduce yourself.
I spend a lot of time communicating. Communicate, and then communicate. Take people's questions, take their anger sometimes. I guess the other thing is I used to do what they do. I know what it's like to teach 500 students. It's hard. It's really hard work. Put your shoulder to the wheel with people, I think. So I'm glad we look as though we've done it. We're certainly on the way. It's not all done yet.
Thank you. This is Kyle Peck from the College of Education here at Penn State and COIL, the Center for Online Innovation and Learning. I'm wondering why you stopped short of giving course credits that are in fact acceptable outside the university. So they go through your Deakin Connect, then they go through a faculty assessment, and you've decided it's worthy of your course credit if they enroll in the program. Why not let them have a credential, a course credit that they can take somewhere else?
Okay. The real answer, Kyle, is because there are 38 other universities in Australia with whom we are in deep competition. And if we've given credit for one unit for a quarter of the price, they can then take that credit to the university next door and trade it in there. So we could do that, but at this stage, this is testing the business model, and I guess this is the challenge with the MOOCs. When we start giving away credit, and we're watching what's happening in the US where, legislation is coming along saying you will accept credit, or, I think I saw this week, is it University of Maryland or University College? I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly the right college, but has just said they're going to accept Coursera credit. That starts to unbundle the business model. We survive as an institution on our student fees, and when those student fees stop coming because our industry, like music, like newspapers, we're all watching to see what happened to the Boston Globe this week. It can disrupt the business model. So we need to go very carefully here. And also, I didn't say, but I should have said, we've capped that offer at 100 places. We'll only give credit and take the money of 100 people in this very first instance to make sure we could actually manage it. We didn't know if 1 million people would sign up. Thank God they haven't. But we're in whole new territory here, so we're giving things away carefully. And we're already giving a lot away. It's the experience, and people are really enjoying it in there. And so we're going carefully.
Thank you, Beverley. We might have room for one more question. Tracy?
I admire so much the work that you and your institution are doing. Thank you for sharing it with us. I'm wondering if you would be willing to reflect on some of the changes you believe it will have in curriculum. In other words, there are obviously changes in the delivery model and a lot of focus then on accreditation. And perhaps there's this fundamental difference that you noted right in the beginning from the focus on liberal arts education that we have in the United States versus the undergraduate professional direction. in your country, but I'm wondering if there have already been discussions about any impact it would have on changing more or less the 19th century German disciplinary model that we have with education being wrapped up in specific disciplines rather than in larger challenges that might be global and problem solving, and using the disciplines as the means to the ends of students working on those questions, rather than the end being that they get a degree in sociology or math or history, et cetera. Thank you.
Yes, and of course it is all about, if I go back to that very slide, it's not, that very first slide, it's not really just about being ready for the profession, of course. Employability is really important, but it's actually about the journey, the education. It's about a brilliant education. So I probably underplayed the first learning outcome on the list, which was knowledge, discipline knowledge, and that has to be there. I guess the thing on accreditation is we have accrediting bodies in I suppose about, in general in Australian universities, half the first year intake is for accredited programs, and I mentioned nursing, pharmacy and so on. Accounting is a huge one. And the other half of the usual intake is probably around what we would call an unaccredited or a less professionally defined course. So, for example, I did a Bachelor of Arts as an undergraduate. We have students who still do generic science degrees and health degrees, unaccredited programs. They're accredited by our institutions but not defined by a professional body. So we have a bit of latitude around that as well. We find many of the accrediting bodies are actually asking for the very things that we're trying to focus on. So accountants keep telling us in their accreditation, for example, that, well, actually we need people who can problem solve, critical think, and so on. So that kind of helps shape it. In the other areas, and I'll take humanities as a classic example, and literature and history and so on, it's a real challenge in that area, and I used to teach in that field myself, in the field of literature. And it's not so easy, but the challenge is, I think, that regardless of what our students study, and I count myself extremely lucky to have had a traditional liberal arts education, studying Italian and French and literature in English, about learning to think and knowing what I really could do and what I really couldn't do. And I think it will shape curriculum, and particularly in those fields, it's a highly discursive field. They are highly discursive fields, and the challenge in the online space is to be able to discuss. And I use that word deliberately, as in engage as we are this afternoon, rather than simply type and post. It's about emulating really good discursive interaction online. I don't think I've answered your question very well. I'm sorry. I think I've wandered on that one. But you point out a really interesting challenge, and that's how to do the broader disciplines in this new world.
Thank you, Beverley. Is there any one last burning question for Beverley? Craig?
Beverley, thank you so much for spending the
I hope
afternoon.
I've been able to give you something for your conference which is helpful and useful anyway.
We have one more question for you if you have a moment, Beverley, before you head off to work.
Yeah, thanks for that.
This is Craig Weidman, Penn State. Thank you so much for sharing your morning with us. I have a question. You talked earlier about the business model. We had a conference call this afternoon with Daphne Kohler, president of Coursera, and she was saying that the University of Georgia is looking to put their entire gen ed and their gateway courses online as massive online credit courses. And in some cases, they may be looking to other institutions to prepare those courses and license them to University of Georgia. I was wondering, are there conversations, and so as far as our business model, we may not agree with it, but it may impact us. I was wondering, are there conversations like that happening also in your country?
Definitely. And, people in my country are saying things like, well, in 20 years' time, there'll probably only be about 100 universities in the world. Or, it'll be, they'll be in there are new friends, there are new global alliances, there are, I will be unsurprised if universities start banding together in new alliances. Well, Coursera is a perfect example. It's like the new Foxtel, the new delivery channel, where it's not just delivering to students, but business to business. So, we were watching it interestedly when Antioch College, took up a licensing model with Coursera and can deliver things a whole lot more cheaply. And people in my country are saying, well, why would we pay someone to deliver the chemistry course when the guy from Harvard can do that? Now, quite frankly, that's slightly scaring as well. Scary in the sense that I'm sure the guy from Harvard, sorry if there's anyone from Harvard in the room, but you know what I'm saying, is, well, that's one view of chemistry in the world, but there may be many views of chemistry or literature or whatever it's going to be. So, but I think it's definitely going to come. And we will find new ways, and I would be unsurprised if a lot of undergraduate education was very unbundled. It may well be in 10 years' time, and maybe this is a future we all dread, maybe. When first year at university, you can actually just do that, most of it online, or you can do 3/4 of it and you do the student experience stuff on a campus. Because maybe it's just so much cheaper. And I know Daphne Kohler was here in Australia last week. I know my own Vice-Chancellor was speaking with her. I think Coursera and edX and others, they have a lot of money behind them. We have challenges in our own universities. These things are gathering pace. The dollar will drive things, and I think our challenge is not to be just afraid of that. I think in some ways we should be slightly afraid, but to stick to the core values, and if that's what's coming, I guess I go back to the newspaper. I don't often read it on paper anymore, but I do read the news, and the news just comes to me on a screen now, and there's advertising around it, but there was on paper as well. But I get it 24/7, and there are new ways of getting news. I'll probably stop there, but I think we have to ride the wave without being dumped by the wave. And in Australia, we have a surfing metaphor where, the wave can actually crash over you. We have to ride on the crest, be careful not to be dumped by the wave.
Thank you. Thank you, Beverley. Beverley, thank you so much for taking your time and especially for your dedication to being with us so early in the morning. We appreciate that. I also appreciate the difficulty of speaking to an audience that you can't see. I know that that's challenging to do, and you were marvelous, so thank you for that.
Tell me they're smiling.
All right. Hey, next time, Beverley, we're going to have you join us face-to-face. We'll work out the details. Thank you. Thanks for being with us. Thank you, Beverley.